A warm welcome to everybody who has joined the Global Technology Summit. This very special virtual edition of the GTS is brought to you by Carnegie India alongside the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. It's been an honor to work with the ministry, and we are very grateful for the vision and support of the Honorable External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar. It has also been an absolute pleasure to have built out the summit along with Joint Secretary Dr. Anupam Ray and his spectacular team at the Policy Planning and Research Division, including Dr. Sumit Seth, the director, and Jaina Krupkar. I am Anu Singh, Deputy Director at Carnegie India. Before I invite our director, Dr. Rudro Chaudhary, to deliver his welcome remarks, I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes with you. For those of you who have logged in through our customized platform, we encourage you to explore the various interactive features that the platform offers. You can connect with other participants in the networking lounge. The Resource Center has a lot of downloadable material on Carnegie India's research across technology, political economy, and security studies. The help desk is, of course, available to you for any queries that you might have. And finally, please do spend a little time in filling up our feedback form. We also encourage you to use social media to comment and contribute to our conversation online. Please stay connected to social media via hashtag Global Tech Summit. In case you are not able to attend any of our live sessions, please watch the discussions online on our website carnegieindia.org or Carnegie India's Facebook page or Carnegie India's YouTube channel. I'd now like to invite Carnegie India's director, Dr. Rudro Chaudhary, to deliver his welcome remarks. Dr. Rudro Chaudhary.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. It gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome you to the Global Technology Summit 2020, brought to you by Carnegie India and co-hosted with the Ministry of External Affairs, the Government of India. This is the fifth GTS. We would ordinarily be in a few very large rooms in person with 1,000 people or more in Bengaluru, our second home. Facebook Live, Twitter Live, and YouTube Live would stream the many conversations and panel discussions, but that was always considered the second best option. The focus was on the room and our physical presence in the same. We're now on a screen with an audience in the many thousands who have registered from nooks and corners of the universe. Whilst nothing can replace the energy, the human connections, and the exchanges in person, we have designed this unique and virtual edition in such a way that it immerses you into a world that is as seamless as it can be. We very much hope that our custom-built virtual platform and the live sessions on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and other social media platforms become your home for the next 5 days. Every evening this week, in Indian Standard Time, we bring to you 5 days and 5 themes of debate, argument, and even resolution on and around the geopolitics of technology, the abiding theme of the GTS 2020. The theme is as apt as it can get. Much like the change in our everyday lives, what is clearly noticeable is the changes in the very form and shape of geopolitics. What internationalism means is more contested today than it was perhaps even a year ago. The outbreak of the pandemic has deepened the shill against globalization. Protectionism has become something of a global bumper sticker for countries across the world. The difference is only in scale and the grammar used to articulate the changing forces of economics, trade, and diversifying supply chains. And what exactly multilateralism means is under re-examination across the world, and for good reasons. The geopolitical changes at present affect and shape the future of technology in equal measure. Terms like splinternet, the balkanization of the internet, digital sovereignty, and data localization are some of the more popular ones that have come to define what could be called the geopolitics around data and technology itself. The argument boils down to the different ways in which governments choose to access, use, and allow data to flow across borders. Countries that have closed their data markets altogether to external actors are commonly referred to as digital authoritarianists. Those that are guided by judicial standards, the rule of law, and support the freer but not always free movement of data have come to be known as digital democracies. The political, ideological, and economic tensions between and within these categories of actors shape what might be called the geopolitics of technology. This form of geopolitics is as much about competing domestic regulations, the renewed focus on antitrust laws, and domestic standards on privacy legislations as it is about international affairs. After all, greater cooperation in artificial intelligence or blockchain technologies between entities in different countries requires mediation and cooperation across physical borders. This is a matter of data diplomacy. This is exactly what the GTS 2020 focuses on over the next 5 days. From the effects of the changing frames of geopolitics, the main theme for today, to the future of data, digital payments and currencies, inclusion, and the possibilities of vaccines and digital public health. Over the next 5 days, we have a spectacular set of speakers, tech czars, senior government ministers and officials, civil society representatives, domain experts and academics, and many others who have given their time to debate the geopolitics of technology. These experts log in from Togo, Nigeria, Australia, Vietnam, Japan, the United States, Slovakia, Kenya, Mozambique, to name just a few countries. They join you in your offices, on your mobile phones and tablets, and in your living rooms as you connect to the GTS from the comfort of your particular time zone. In essence, we look forward to being part of this collective ecosystem along with you as we argue, debate, build bridges, and perhaps even find avenues for reconciliation on the differing aspects of the geopolitics of technology. We have been privileged to be able to host the 5th edition of the GTS because of the support and large-minded vision of our partners, supporters, and most importantly, our co-host, the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. In particular, we would like to thank Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, for his continued support and vision for the GTS. It has been a genuine pleasure to work alongside the Policy Planning and Research Division in the MEA, led by Joint Secretary Dr. Anupam Ray and his team. Further, we have received exceptional support from India's missions abroad, and we remain indebted to the many ambassadors, members of their teams and missions for their suggestions and constant cooperation. Equally, we would like to thank the many foreign missions based here in India who worked with us, sometimes well past midnight, to make this GTS as internationally inclusive as is possible. We thank the government of Karnataka and especially KTech and Innovate Karnataka that have supported this virtual edition without hesitation. We're deeply grateful to the Honorable Deputy Chief Minister of Karnataka, Dr. Ashwath Narayan, for his continued enthusiastic support. Bengaluru remains the home of the GTS, even as we log on from Togo, Mumbai, Nigeria, United States, New Delhi, Vietnam, and Australia, and many other parts of the world. Given the peculiar nature of this year, we were unsure of the support we may receive from the private sector, and we were proven wrong. Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, a moving spirit of the GTS, guided us, pushed us back, and helped us to produce a finer and more substantive set of conversations. Similarly, Mohandas Pai's abiding support for us at Carnegie India remains immeasurable. Likewise, we are hugely supportive of the unhesitating support provided to the GTS by our summit partners, Biocon, Facebook, Google India, Intel India, and Amazon India, and our session partners, the National Payments Corporation of India, or NPCI. The GTS could not have also been possible in this particular format without the support and help of the print, our digital partner, Bloomberg Quint, our media partner, and India Ahead News, our broadcast partner. I would also like to thank in particular the senior convener of the GTS, Shruti Sharma, who's done an exceptional job, the head of communications at Carnegie India, Nandita Singh, who hasn't slept in about 2 months, our center administrator, Alok Kumar, and our deputy director, Anu Singh, for tirelessly working alongside the team, and in particular, the technical team at Carnegie India, led by Anush and Baba, for giving life to the screen, the GTS that you see over the next 5 days. There are so many others who have guided us, given us their invaluable time, got on a call in a moment's notice, with the collective sense of making this summit challenging and revealing in multiple ways. There are too many to name here, but more than anything else, I would like to thank these special spirits for keeping us intellectually honest and reminding us that above all else, technology and geopolitical debates around the same ought to be about people, human connections, and the advancement of every life. This GTS is about you. As our audience, you are the integral link between a conversation and the challenge that it deserves. So I hope very much that as you log on to the GTS platform or as you watch GTS on social media, do ask the tough and even impossible questions, contribute to this truly global effort to unwrap the geopolitics of technology. Thank you, stay connected, and most importantly, enjoy this week. Goodbye.
This is the one platform, the one summit that seriously discusses the policy dimensions around technology.
A program like this on data and technology brings to the fore that India has to move ahead on the data privacy issue.
You must keep in mind that it not only has an impact on those who are attending, but those who are attending take these back and impact on policy in different ways.
I'm confident that this is going to be yet another success in the entire series.
Today we can create a framework which protects privacy in a digital world.
E-government itself is about transformation. If you have not made any difference to the common man or to a business, it's no good.
Today, the paradigm is connectivity defines the destiny.
If our aspiration is to be a leading power one day, we have to be a leading power in also harnessing data.
It is now my utmost privilege to invite Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister for External Affairs, Government of India, to deliver the inaugural remarks. Dr. Jaishankar joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1977, and during his diplomatic career spanning over 38 years, he served in different capacities in India and abroad, including as High Commissioner to Singapore and as Ambassador to the Czech Republic, China, and the USA. Dr. Jaishankar also played a key role in negotiating the Indo-US Civilian Nuclear Agreement. Dr. Jaishankar.
Well, let me begin by saying it's a great pleasure to join you all this evening, my time, India. We, MEA and Carnegie, have been partners in this event for some years now. So I'm really very pleased that this is continuing, because I know this is quite different from a lot of other events that we do with our other partners. I think the subjects are different, the audiences are a little different. And my own sense is it's also a very contemporary way of looking at the big issues of our era. And quite honestly, I can't think of a better way of framing it than the way it's been done, which is today the whole debate about how technology has got more political. Now, before we actually get down to the issues, I'd just like to make 3 or 4 points, which from my perspective would frame the issue. One, a recognition that the world we are in today is very different, is politically very different. That it is a very much more multipolar world. It is in many ways less structured than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It is also a less multilateral world. Multilateralism is going through its own difficult challenges. So you are really looking at a world, I would say, of more variables and looser equations. And therefore, how do you solve the sums of this world? I think are going to test us much more certainly in terms of creativity than they have before. The second point I would flag is actually about globalization, because whether we like it or not, I think the politics of the world today, and I will then move to the technology bit, is really reactions to the unfolding of globalization. And there, I would argue that the fundamental challenge has been that in many societies, globalization has sharpened inequality. It has created winners and losers. It has created resentments and political consequences of those. But it has also led to unequal benefits among nations. So it is not just that societies have become more argumentative and in a sense less consensual on the subject of globalization. I think so have nations. So the issue to my mind is not whether you have globalization or you don't, because I think it's a reality. It is how do you actually make it work in a fair and equitable way for more nations and for more people within each nation. Now, then we come to the technology bit. One element of this globalization is really how much technology has really joined the world. It has not only connected the world, it's actually made it much more interpenetrating. That, you know, when you think in terms of what technology has done to our concept of national security historically was something outside our borders. It's no longer so. So the metrics of power have certainly changed. But I would even argue the definition of what is a challenge and what is a asset and what is in a sense a issue to be a policy to be addressed. It's much the distinction between domestic and external, I think, has effectively vanished. Now, like every other foreign ministry, we have also been looking at this. A year ago, we created a particular division with the mandate to look at technologies which have political strategic consequences. To look at the debates which are taking place in the world today and the negotiations in some cases, you know, the discussions, what are the regimes we need to do? Do we need? What are the downsides? What are the benefits of those? So in that sense, you know, I would say technology is clearly very political. It is today very much a core part of diplomacy. It is something which every foreign ministry is going to be focused on in many ways, in a very, very central way. So I do believe that, you know, the technology summit at this juncture has actually framed an important issue for a larger public debate. And by the way, I would also add that if there are two countries who need to be talking about this intensively, it's India and the United States, because a large part of our relationship is a tech-driven relationship. That if you look at the economic connect, you look at the diaspora connect, you look actually even in a sense today at our strategic connect, it's very tech-driven. So it's important as a larger discussion on global affairs, but I think it's also very much a centerpiece of our own relationship. So I'm very pleased that you sort of brought this right up there, fair and square, for a discussion. Once again, very happy to join you today and look forward to the half an hour that will follow.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaishankar, for your inaugural remarks. We now have Dr. Jaishankar in conversation with William J. Burns, President, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. William Burns previously served as the US Deputy Secretary of State. The discussion will be moderated by Dr. Rudro Chaudhary.
Good evening. It is a real pleasure to welcome Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Honorable Minister of External Affairs of India, and William Burns, the President of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former US Deputy Secretary of State. Dr. Jaishankar, William Burns, thank you so very much for taking the time for this marquee conversation at the Global Technology Summit 2020, co-hosted by Carnegie India and the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. The topic for this conversation, and as Dr. Jaishankar eloquently put it in his opening remarks, is framed around the geopolitics of technology, which is spread across 5 days with 5 dedicated themes. The future of each of these themes, whether it's data, digital currencies or payments, inclusion, vaccine technologies, speaks to the need for greater collaboration, both within the political boundaries of states, but also between different geographical jurisdictions. So with this in mind, I would like to start with a broader question on your visions for multilateralism. Dr. Jaishankar, you framed multilateralism for us and its changing fortunes in the present time. You have argued, perhaps most clearly in your book, The India Way, and I quote here, that the tumultuous times we now live in are a far cry from the soothing sounds of globalization that we heard just a few years ago. You've written and spoken of the prospects of multipolarity with less multilateralism and the need for a new energy to be poured into reform multilateralism. So if I could just push you a little bit on this, is what exactly does this mean in practical terms as India negotiates the current changes in geopolitics?
Let me make 3 or 4 points here. I mean, first of all, for obvious reasons, we tend to equate multilateralism with the United Nations. The fact is, today, the United Nations is 75 years old. Okay. The number of members of the United Nations is about 4 times what it was when the United Nations began. So if any entity, any product is 75 years old and has changed 4 times over, you would not deny that it's essentially anachronistic. Now, the problem we have today about the narrow representation at the leadership levels of the United Nations, I think in many ways is a challenge to its credibility and to its effectiveness. Now, obviously India has an interest in the matter, but I'd urge you to even look at a continent like Africa. If 50 plus nations don't have a voice, just think in terms of what is their sense of ownership of the workings of this organization. And it's very interesting when I look at it. I think you'd see that actually P5 nations are beginning to lose elections in the United Nations. And it's a bit of it's an interesting development, which really means that the thinking among the member states about them is not what it used to be. And sometimes it has practical issues. I mean, you look at something like peacekeeping operations. I mean, those who kind of decide the rules of peacekeeping are not those countries who send the forces of peacekeeping. So, you actually have this dichotomy. So, in that sense, whoever is the SG, is landed actually with a very difficult situation. I mean, it's very challenging for any SG to work in this situation. So my first point would be that you do need to reform multilateralism. You need to make it representative. You need to, you refresh your phone regularly. Okay. Somebody needs to press that refresh button on the United Nations. Okay. And again, it's fair. Countries would have views. I may like one, I may not like the other. It's nobody's case that it should be an entitlement-driven process. There will be the process of election which will decide that. But I think today we are seeing a very determined blocking of change in the name of I don't like country X or I don't like country Y. I think it's very unfair on the world that has emerged since 1945. I think it's particularly unfair on Africa. So to my mind, if the big problem is not fixed, because the United Nations is the brand name in a sense of multilateralism, I think multilateralism will lose credibility. Now, the second point very quickly is actually of conflicting agendas, that you have a sharpening in a sense of interests and views among major powers. And it has in many areas created gridlocks. So a lot of the discussions are actually taking place not in any kind of multilateral format, but outside that. So unless in a sense, if you broaden the multilateral drivers, you would actually possibly make this gridlock less sort of deep. Associated with that is also a tendency sometimes, a country will take its particular issue, its agenda, a national agenda, and try to pass it off as though it's international, as it's collective, without consultation with everybody else. So that also, I think, doesn't help multilateralism, because then it looks like multilateral formats are being used really to advance very narrow national goods. Now, the behavior of states on multilateralism has also raised questions. I think you've had countries who have not observed international law because it doesn't suit them. You have countries who have cherry-picked, what they liked and what they didn't in terms of regimes and norms. You've had some gaming of the system, I think particularly in the field of trade, none of which frankly has helped the reputation of multilateralism. And the result of all of this today is the world is significantly more bilateral, and the world is also looking at more plurilateral answers. That if a structured format can't give you a solution, then okay, 5 of us or 10 of us who agree on finding a solution, let's step outside the room, figure out what we believe is the right thing to do, and go ahead and do that. So the world seems to be going in that direction, and I would argue it's real. It's not the best answer. I would still feel the world is better off with a reformed multilateralism with greater acceptance in the world.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to come back to the question of cherry picking and multilateralism in a minute. But Bill, if I could just turn to you. In the past 4 years, you've been one of the most passionate advocates, as you yourself write, for the rebirth of American diplomacy to a new strategy for a new century. You have made a very strong and convincing case for the need for reinvention of American foreign policy. So not just restoration, but almost a complete overhaul of American foreign policy. As a new administration takes office in the United States, one that is clearly committed to recovering American leadership abroad, in practical terms, what will this look like? What are the pages from Bill Burns' reinvention book that are likely to shape President Biden's foreign policy drive?
Well, first, let me say, Rudra, I'm delighted that you and all of our colleagues at Carnegie India are embarked on another Global Technology Summit. I really admire your work, and it's also terrific to be with my friend and former colleague, the Minister. who, in my experience over the years, is as fine a diplomat as I ever worked with. And I really enjoyed your opening remarks as well. I can't speak for President-elect Biden or his administration. I have enormous respect for him. He'll be the most experienced president when he takes office next month since George H.W. Bush 30 years ago. And he's putting together an exceptional team. I think President-elect Bush knows as well as anyone that the world he's going to be returning to is not the same as it was 4 years ago for all the reasons that the minister just described. Our domestic landscape has shifted in some important ways with a variety of dysfunctions, political polarization, racial injustice, growing economic inequality. And again, as Dr. Jaishankar just described eloquently, the international landscape has been shifting for some time with, major shifts in the balance of power among states with the rise of China and India. I think major new global challenges that go beyond the reach of any one state, whether it's climate change, the biggest existential crisis that human society faces, the revolution in technology, on which this summit is focused. How do you maximize the benefits and minimize the dislocations and develop effective and workable rules of the road, and obviously global health insecurities as well. But all of those do require a new kind of multilateralism. I absolutely agree. And then third and not least, I think, as you look at the contours of an international landscape that's in the process of significant transformation. I mean, one of those rare plastic moments in international order that comes along maybe a couple of times a century. There are, increasing uncertainties about the role of the main driver of the old international order, the post-Cold War international order, in my own country, the United States, seen, I think, especially in recent years, to be increasingly erratic and uncertain at the wheel. So all of those together, I think, create huge challenges. And the pandemic, in many respects, over the last year has, I think, exposed and accelerated a lot of those pre-existing conditions. So we'll have a new driver at the wheel on the 20th of January. And that, in my view, is a very welcome thing. But, that's just going to be a start. There's always talk of the United States returning to its seat at the head of the table, which is an admirable idea. But that also is just the start. It's not as if you return to a seat at the table, at the head of the table, and you're surrounded by allies and partners and suitably impressed rivals. The United States is going to have to earn that through disciplined engagement with the world and disciplined leadership. It's going to have to, in the Biden administration, I think, navigate between the illusion of restoration, because it's not as if we can turn a switch and return the world and our role in it to what it was some years ago. But there's an equally illusory temptation, which is massive retrenchment from that world, just to focus on nation building at home. That kind of underreach, I think, carries as many risks as the overreach that we were sometimes guilty of since 9/11 in the last 20 years. So what all that means, I think, is a much more disciplined American approach to foreign policy, I think, grouped around three priorities. First, exactly as Dr. Jaishankar said, a much more intimate connection between domestic renewal and foreign policy. Second, a new kind of multilateralism to deal with those global challenges that I described before. And in a way demonstrating to a skeptical American public that kind of approach to foreign policy is really the first line of defense for American society to make it more resilient in the face of external shocks. And then third, and not least, the challenge of what will be an intense long-term rivalry between the United States and China. And here I think President-elect Biden understands as well as anyone that Chinese rivalry is with the Chinese leadership that in many ways is much more durable politically, more vibrant economically than the Soviet Union ever was during the height of the Cold War. But I think the challenge, while not underestimating Chinese capacity or ambitions, is also to understand the strong hand that the United States has to play. And this is a self-absorbed comment about American policy, but I think there does exist a web of partners and allies across the Indo-Pacific who share an interest in ensuring that China's rise doesn't come at the expense of their security and prosperity. So that creates an opportunity, I think, not so much to prevent China's rise as to shape the environment into which it rises. And I think, that becomes, as important a test of American statecraft in the Biden administration and beyond it as I can imagine. The very last thing I'd say, and I'm sorry, as a recovering diplomat, I've just demonstrated my capacity to rattle on forever. But I think the partnership, the strategic partnership that's built up over the last 20 years between the United States and India is going to remain critically important in all of those priorities in American foreign policy that I just described, and for all the reasons that Dr. Jaishankar just emphasized as well. And so we're going to need to be talking about all of those issues, whether it's how do you reinvent multilateralism, how does that relate to the kind of pluralistic approaches that the minister mentioned? How does it relate to our economic interactions and our security partnership as well? So it's going to make that partnership more, not less important in the years ahead.
Thanks, Bill. Dr. Jaishankar, if I could pick up one of the threads. So, Bill made the kind of argument which you've also made about the connection between the domestic and the international. There's been a fair bit of commentary, sometimes criticism, of India's articulation of self-sufficiency, especially in the past 10 months. You yourself have argued that in many ways, that the world is going to move through this kind of single-minded pursuit of national interest. Whether it turns into a bazaar, you said there'll be more players, greater volatility, and less rules. But in your book, you also make a strong case between the balance between Atmanirbhar Bharat and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family. I was just wondering, can you flesh out what that balance actually looks and feels like?
Okay, before I give you a substantive answer, let me make one comment so that people are quite clear what I wrote in the book. Okay, I kind of set out, in a sense, a more selfish, self-centered world. But I was also equally clear that's not the way for India to go. That, that we, for reasons of our own history and our own aspirations, should actually aim for a higher standard. So I just want to be very clear there. Now, coming to your question, in a sense, because perhaps some of your listeners may not understand Atmanirbhar Bharat, that means essentially self-reliant India. So self-reliant India is a policy approach of the current government to actually build greater economic strengths at home. So the question really is, how do you square building more economic strengths at home, so a more self-reliant outlook with your global outlook? Now, for starters, look at the history of modernization, at least in recent times. Again, sorry to go back to my book. I've made the point that every major economy that has modernized in the last 150 years has done so by actually connecting with the world. You can pick, you want to start with Meiji Japan, go to Soviet Union after the Bolshevik Revolution, then take a gap and maybe move to the Asian tigers, to ASEAN. I mean, you look at them, all of them have actually leveraged international relations for national development. And the point I have made then, which I continue to make, is India has not done as much as it could have, as it should have in this respect. The second, related to that, is in a more tech world, this is even more important. So the idea that, somehow you can build your strengths by staying at home, I don't think anybody serious would even look at it. So a lot of the criticism, if you would, are actually caricatures which have an agenda. This is political polemics. Okay, so I think we need to differentiate between a serious conversation and some of the point scoring, which particularly we Indians are very good at. Now, what is self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat? The idea is really build your domestic strengths, enhance your capabilities, invest at home, improve your own capacities. Now, this is not something unique to India or to this government. I just draw your attention. I was reading Tom Friedman's interview with the president-elect. Okay, and I give you a quote. Okay, I want to make sure that we are going to fight like hell by investing in America first, said Biden. He ticked off energy, biotech, advanced materials, and artificial intelligence as areas ripe for large-scale government investment and research. I am not going to enter any new trade arrangement with anybody until we have made major investments here at home and in our workers. So what you have is really the president-elect saying, look, I'm going to, in a sense, create a more self-reliant America. I mean, a point which Bill made about actually investing at home and create, having the ability to compete. And I think India has the same aspiration, the same entitlement in that regard. So essentially, our program today is to rebuild manufacturing, because we have seen manufacturing significantly eroded in the last 20 years. Okay, we want to actually give our own industry today a level playing field, which they have not had, because the earlier trading arrangements actually left them open to subsidized imports from abroad, and also presented them with the challenge of market access abroad. So we want a fairer trade arrangement for our own people so that we build those strengths. Now that fits in very well with a kind of a global outlook that we have, because if you look at India in this very period, I mean, if I were to benchmark India 2020 with even India 2014, I would say we are definitely much more into global politics than we have before. We are, we were critical for Paris, for the agreement to happen in Paris. We have tabled two major initiatives, the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilience. We have shaped the G20 agenda in a very, very vigorous manner. So I think India will be more international, but we want to come to the table with more cards in our hands, just as America wants to do the same. Now, what the COVID has done is COVID has actually made these debates and these challenges much sharper. Okay, because the two issues which have come out of the COVID challenge for international relations are one of transparency and two of reliability. So I think today we are not only looking at a fairer world, fairer international system, also a more trusted one. Now, one way to go, of course, would be, you do more FTAs, but free trade agreements, first of all, you need to pick the right ones. They can be time consuming. We have been arguing with some partners saying, why don't we do an early harvest? But, there are views about that. But I think in parallel, we have shifted a lot of our attention today to actually attracting global companies so that the global supply chains, the global value chains go through India, for which we have made it, we've undertaken a whole set of reforms to make it easier to do business. So my sense is today you will see an India which will build up its strength, but at the same time be much more open to the world, which will be much more attractive to global companies, which will be much more aggressively seeking investments from abroad. So I don't see this, I see them frankly as two sides of the same coin. And what I do want to emphasize is, look, I think the days are over when we should be just a market for others. At the end of the day, what's India's sort of US? It is, we have enormous talent. We have to bring that talent into play at home and globally. And we need to be part of any answer which the world is looking, as you said, whether it is vaccines or whether it is, any other part of the tech world.
Thank you, sir. Bill, can I just turn to you? In a sense, it almost seems like India and America are, in a sense, pretty much in the same place, trying to chart a future to square the balance between self-reliance and what a new internationalism might actually look like. You yourself has written about the need to course correct in America and perhaps the need for the American middle class to play a more powerful role in the way in which foreign policy is imagined. How do you see this actually squaring up in the near future? We hear in the Biden administration a greater call for globalization, free trade. Many argue that Biden 1.0 may look a bit more like Obama 2.0. But how do you see the near future, and how do you square that circle?
I think, as Dr. Jaishankar said, this is not an either or proposition. You know, this is not a question of either national self-reliance or a kind of, undiscriminating approach to globalization. I think for both the United States and India, the challenge is finding a balance between the two. I came of age professionally, at least as a young diplomat, at the height of globalization euphoria, 30 years ago, when the assumption, the lazy assumption in some ways, at least in the United States, was that globalization was going to kind of inexorably lift all boats. Well, the truth is that not only do I think that we overreached in foreign policy, engaged in our own kind of magical thinking sometimes in the last 20 years about our capacity to transform other societies while neglecting the transformation of our own, to take into account the reality that globalization offers huge benefits. And we've seen that as hundreds of millions of people in India and China and Africa and around the world have been able to increase their sense of economic opportunity and move into the middle class. Huge advances in science and public health around the world as well, notwithstanding the current pandemic. But the reality also is that there are downsides as well that have to be taken into account. And so the challenge for the Biden administration is to try to find that balance, to help reinforce to Americans that, of course, there's going to be a huge national challenge in navigating past the pandemic, but we can't do that successfully, let alone prepare for a future pandemic, unless we find better ways to cooperate multilaterally and internationally, unless we find ways to reform the World Health Organization, not abandon it. The same is true on economic recovery. No big economy, whether it's the United States or India, is going to successfully navigate past the economic repercussions of the pandemic without international coordination. It's obviously true on climate change as well. It's true with regard to the phenomenon, as the minister was discussing, of how do you best harness the benefits of technology and develop workable rules of the road? That'll be another challenge for the Biden administration at a moment, in American political discourse where, the UN system, multilateralism are not sort of wildly popular notions. And so the challenge is going to be to demonstrate in very practical terms the benefits that smart, disciplined connection to the rest of the world can produce for Americans. And I think that's very similar to the challenge that Jaishankar just described, with regard to India today as well. So much easier said than done. I absolutely agree that this increases the importance of, discussion and collaboration between the United States and India. I know that process will not be easy. Much of my white hair came from negotiating with Indian counterparts over the years, but I think we share a broad sense of common purpose on these issues too. And I think we have much more to gain than we have to lose by trying to tackle issues of regulation and technology, issues of geopolitics of data, in ways in which like-minded countries can develop, if not identical strategies on those issues, at least complementary and coordinated ones, because that's the only way, it seems to me, to gain traction in dealing with the much different visions of those issues that, countries like China or Russia have today too. So it's going to require a lot of work. But this is the central challenge, I think, finding that balance between self-reliance and a smart, disciplined approach to globalization. That's going to be the central challenge for both India and the United States, I think, as we look at over the next decade and beyond.
Dr. Jaishankar, if I could just pick up the one point that Bill made on trust in the world of technology, and I'm sure as will be discussed over the 5 days of this summit, terms like balkanization of the internet, tech sovereignty hypnosis when it comes to technology seem to be the abiding terms of this form of geopolitics. How does India, or how do we find that trust with like-minded countries, get beyond the disagreements on the treatment of data, for instance, to come to some kind of a new compact, whether it's bilateral, whether it's plurilateral, whether it's multilateral. And I say this to the both of you. You've both negotiated perhaps the trickiest agreement that India and the US have ever signed, the US-India nuclear deal. You're both champions of this relationship. But how do we find that trust?
Well, I mean, first of all, where India and US are concerned, I don't think that's an issue. Okay. But I would readily accept that today in the world is less trusting, after the COVID than it was before. But also, let's be fair, I think it was moving in that direction even independently of the COVID. Okay. Now, what has it done? What one among its sort of consequences has been that our sense of national security has actually widened to really capture many other domains of our existence. I mean, typically, you thought of it in terms of defense or policing terms, intelligence terms, law terms. But certainly COVID has made health security a very, very central part of the national security, especially of larger countries. Okay, I would argue that pre-COVID, but certainly post-COVID, data security is again very much central to that. I was 2 weeks ago in the Gulf, and I could see concerns about food security, which were not there in the last 5 years that I used to visit the Gulf. And part of it, I mean, it was good for us because through this entire COVID period, we kept our supply lines going to the Gulf. Certainly now, again, I'll give you an Indian perspective. For us, energy security is very important. And I think today, connectivity, even trade, all these have become elements of a wider understanding of a more insecure world about what constitutes national security. And there, the trust factor, of course, is particularly sensitive when it comes to technology and when it comes to data. I accept that. Now, I made the point in my initial remarks that when you think of globalization, this globalization as we know it, not what it was a century ago, this globalization certainly is much more interdependent, but it is much more interpenetrative as well. So our sense of national security is no longer at our borders, it's right there in your homes. So it is, but our responses are also much more constrained because we are interdependent. So, nobody has a radical freedom of action, or you do, but in very, very few cases. So I think the problem has really become more complex. Now, again, just look back in history in a sense. When you look at politics or strategy, typically as we learn to navigate new domains, we included that in our arena of operations, if you would. So, initially armies would move on land, then they started to move on sea. When they found airplanes, they started to move on air, then they went into space. But these are physical domains. Today, actually, I think pretty much every human activity has got politicized and with some countries even weaponized. That, you can, finance has become a vulnerability and also a pressure point. Trade has become, that applies as well. Connectivity can be used to offer inducements or to build pressure. So there is, the whole debate of what is security, what is vulnerability, what is defense, what is leverage. All of that, I think, has become very much more complex, and the world of technology has clearly sort of raised it to the power end. Now, I agree with you that issues of trust are very important, and finally, trust is shaped by behavior. I think to some degree by sociology. How are we at home? Because how I behave at home is how I'm going to behave largely abroad. I think the idea that there is you can have two behavioral types don't really work in nation states and their politics. I think to some degree record as well. I think if you've had a scarring experience or two, that also tends to erode trust. So I do see these issues, and I think a lot of that feeds into our desire today. One part of the self-reliant India, which I spoke about, is aspiration. I mean, we aspire to things. We would like to have more capacities, but one part is also that we need to be more secure. And I would say certainly a lot of steps that this government has taken. It has made India much more digital. It has, I don't think any government has really given startups and innovation the kind of privacy which it has. On hardware, we have announced a very ambitious sort of, scheme, incentive scheme to attract hardware manufacturing in India. So you are going to see, as I say, both an India with greater capacities, but also an India which in many ways feels, okay, at least I have my fundamental basis better covered. But I come back to the bilateral relationship. I think this has been a relationship of growing trust. Bill would agree with me that, if you look, part of the reason we both have white hair was that we asked too many questions about each other. We won't ask those questions today. When I look at the complexity of some of the agreements we have reached in recent months and years, we would not have even contemplated those in the earlier era. So I think while I still would stand by that statement that the world has become more distrustful, I think some relationships have actually become much, much closer and much stronger. And I would certainly cite that the India-America one is one of them. So I'm actually, at the end of the day, very optimistic on this call.
Thank you, sir. And last question on China, which perhaps used to be the elephant in the room, but no more. So, Bill, on this whole question of trust in tech, clearly it is the distrust in technology that drove a large part of the decoupling strategy under the Trump administration, whether it was banning Chinese apps, making it difficult for China to do business in America, steering away from Chinese firms investing in 5G. Do you see this kind of a strategy, especially with regards to technology, continuing over the next 2 or 3 years? Or do you see a different kind of approach to China?
Well, I think it's a big, broad question, and I guess I would say the following. First, I think the intense nature of U.S.-Chinese competition is certainly going to increase. As I said before, I think President-elect Biden has no illusions about the nature of that competition, nor does he have any illusions about the importance of reducing vulnerabilities. Whether it's to single points of failure in supply chains and, in certain very sensitive areas, whether it's in national security areas, sensitive technologies, even global health and medical equipment areas. So I think that's going to continue to be a focus in the new administration, as well as certainly in the U.S. Congress as well. I do think that you'll see my guess is that you'll see a couple of significant contrasts, though. First, I think, is an even greater emphasis on that issue of trust, working with partners and allies and dealing with a lot of those challenges. I think building on the trust that, has increased over recent years and recent decades between the United States and China as we try to sort through a lot of the issues we've been discussing on rules of the road and technology, and how we interact economically and in security terms as well. That's a huge asset for the United States. And, one of my criticisms of the current administration is that, well, I think there has been admirably a lot of focus on U.S.-India partnership. I think that approach to alliances and partnerships has been quite uneven, to put it diplomatically. And I think you'll see in a Biden administration much more of a focus on that. Second, I do think, again, as Dr. Jaishankar read of the interview that President-elect Biden did recently, you'll see a much sharper focus on, increasing national competitiveness at home on all these issues, investing in education and research and development as well, because that's really the key to domestic renewal in our country. It's the key to being able to compete effectively. And I think, finally, you'll see much more of an interest in the kind of standard setting capacity that the United States has, again, work not unilaterally, but working with allies and partners around the world. Standards in everything from economic competition across the Indo-Pacific to the new rules of the road and technology. This is going to be a grinding step-by-step process. I mean, I wish I was optimistic enough to tell you that I think there's going to be some brand new United Nations convention on those issues, that it's going to emerge fully formed. I don't think that's going to be the case. It's going to take like-minded countries, for want of a better term, who can build greater and greater trust among themselves, developing rules of the road on, how do you make the best use of technology, so that recognizing, the ways in which it can be distorted for surveillance technology and authoritarian regimes, and the way in which it can contribute to more effective open governance, to connections between civil society groups as well. And, that's a conversation I think that's going to be central to the US-India partnership and to, I think American foreign policy as far out as I can see into the 21st century. I think that's the best way to play what is still a strong hand for the United States in the world, but one in which we need to invest in the capacity which we have for alliances, for partnerships, for mobilizing other countries, because it's that capacity, I still believe, which sets the United States apart from lonelier powers like China or Russia or anyone else.
Thanks, Bill. And Dr. Jaishankar, the last question to you is, India is the largest open data market in the world. That demography is not going to change for the next many decades. It has scale. Europe, Japan, the United States have capital. There's a clear compact between the way in which these different planets can come together. India also takes an international position. Come January, we'll be a non-permanent member of the UNSC. Come 2022, we'll chair the G20. Shouldn't technology be leveraged to create some kind of a new leadership compact that India drives internationally? And if so, what might that look like?
I don't know, because if I were to pick up on what Bill said, I'm not sure that we are really in the era of big international compacts. I think we have to kind of work our way through the situation which we are in, which is frankly messy on many scores. My own sense is that the best contribution that India can make to the world today is really to participate much more in in global change. Okay. I think, and to do that, India has to shape up. It's not going to happen because we are India. So we will have to make the changes, the reforms, the incentives, offer attractive conditions for that to happen. And when that happens, I think to some degree the world would benefit clearly, and so would India. So I would define to me, the question in a very different manner than you would, because look, at the end of the day, for me, my benchmark for whether even my foreign policy is working or not is finally what are the employment numbers that it leads to, because I think this is today a question. I think all of us have woken up to the whole danger of jobless growth. Now, if I were to define it in that way, I would put it, how do I bring my talent into play? Because I have a reservoir of talent. How do I keep improving that and scaling up that reservoir? How do I get it into play? And to do that, I think that the answer would be all of the above. There could be international negotiations, there could be plurilateral ones, there could be bilateral ones, there could be informal understanding, there could be like-minded, as Bill said. And we are seeing some of that. I mean, if you look at vaccines, for example, finally, frankly, if the world gets that kind of volume of vaccines which it needs, I mean, India is going to make a very, very significant contribution to that. Now, I see that happening in other areas as well. I would at least like to.
Dr. Jaishankar, William Burns, thank you so much for giving your time to this inaugural conversation for the Global Technology Summit 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.